What would you do if your entire life was dictated by someone else's shame? At 20 years old, my father's shame of being poor turned me into merchandise. I was sold off to a 4-5-year-old man, a wealthy stranger the entire town whispered about. I prepared myself for a life of hell, to be resigned to the fate of property that had been bought and sold. But what I discovered on our wedding night wasn't cruelty. It was a secret he had kept hidden for decades, one more painful than my father's arrangement, and ironically, it was the very thing that set us both free. This story is for anyone who is feeling trapped, defined by others, or believes they aren't worthy of love. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. And this is my story. You know why? Because there are many people out there who need to hear that there is a way to overcome, that there is hope even in the most complicated situations in life. And another thing, comment down below where you're listening from. It could be from any corner of this America of ours, which I love to get to know. Tell me too, if you've been through a similar situation, or if you know someone who has. We're going to create a support chain here, folks. Every like, every comment, every share could be the little push someone needs to not give up on life. And if you made it this far, it's because God wants you to hear this entire story. So don't be shy, participate. Now, let's get to the story that changed my life forever. It was 1946 when I was born in a small wooden house in Harmony Creek, Tennessee. My father, Walter Hayes, was a farmhand on Mr. Harold Vance's farm, and my mother, Clara, took in sewing to help support the house. We were poor, but not destitute. At least not at first. "This girl is going to be a fighter," said the midwife when she saw me crying my lungs out the day I was born. "She has fire in her eyes, just like her father." If only she knew that fire was slowly fading, day by day, maybe she would have prophesied differently. I grew up surrounded by 5 brothers: James, Michael, Robert, Daniel, and Thomas. You might be wondering where 5 older brothers were when their sister was in trouble. But that's just how it was back then. Boys were raised to look out at the world, while girls were tied to the kitchen corner. They feared my father too, and perhaps they were also taught that my business wasn't theirs. I was the only girl, the youngest, and that should have made me the princess of the house. Instead, I became the prisoner. "Girl, don't play in the street," my father would say every time I tried to run after my brothers. "A girl's place is inside the house, helping her mother." I was barely 5 years old when I heard those words for the first time, but I already knew my life would be different from my brothers. While my brothers ran free through the fields, climbed trees, and played baseball in the town square, I stayed cooped up inside the house, learning to sew, to cook, to be a proper family girl. "Tilly," my mother would call me every morning. "Come here and help your mama with the food." And there I'd go, with my little bare feet on the packed dirt floor, to help peel potatoes, grind corn, and sweep the yard. It wasn't just housework, it was preparation for what they thought would be my destiny. To marry as a virgin, be a good wife, give my husband sons. My father treated my virginity as if it were the family's most precious asset. "This girl will marry pure," he'd always repeat, "or she won't marry at all." When I turned 10 inches 1956, things got even stricter. "Tilly, you don't go out alone anymore," my father decreed. "If you go anywhere, you go with your mother or one of your brothers." It was as if I were a treasure that needed to be kept under lock and key. I remember one Sunday afternoon, I must have been about 12, when I saw the girls my age playing Ring Around the Rosie in the square. "Mama," I begged, "can I go play with the girls?" My mother looked at me with pity, but shook her head. "Your father won't allow it. Honey, he says a girl who plays in the street gets lost." Lost. That word echoed in my head every day. How could a 1-2-year-old girl get lost playing Ring Around the Rosie? But I didn't question it. In those days, a girl didn't question her father, no matter how absurd the rule was. "Walter," I heard my mother whisper to my father one night, "the girl is getting awfully sad. Won't it hurt her to play just a little?" "Clara," he replied in that gruff voice that allowed no argument. "A girl who's too happy becomes a flirt. Better sad than lost. And so I grew up, sad, quiet, obedient. While my brothers discovered the world, I discovered only the four walls of my house. While they learned to be men, I learned to be a shadow. In school, which I only attended until I was 14, the other girls would talk about courting, about the little notes they received, about the glances they exchanged at church. I listened to it all quietly because I had nothing to share. My life was home, school, church, always watched, always controlled. Tilly is different, I'd hear the neighbors comment. She's a serious family girl. Family. That word that should bring protection and love, for me, was synonymous with prison. Family was the place where I couldn't be myself, where I couldn't dream, where I couldn't even breathe right. When I left school at 14, my father said, "Now you dedicate yourself to the house, to learning those womanly things. Sewing, embroidery, cooking. That's what a man looks for in a wife." Wife. I didn't even really know what it was to be a wife, but they were already preparing me for it since I was little. Sundays were the worst. At service, I'd see the boys looking at the other young ladies, talking, laughing. Some even flirted secretly after church, but I stayed glued between my father and my mother, unable to exchange a single glance with anyone. "Why won't Daddy let me talk to anyone?" I asked my mother when I turned 15. "Because he wants to protect you, honey," she answered, but there was a sadness in her eyes that said something else. "Protect me from what, Mama?" "From the evils of the world. Evils of the world." To my father, any contact I had with the opposite sex was evil. A boy saying hello was evil. A neighbor asking how I was evil. A fellow from church smiling was evil. At 16, I started to wonder if I was going to spend my whole life this way, watching life pass by through the window, listening to other people's stories, always living in the shadows. "Mama," I said one afternoon, "do you think I'll ever get married?" "Yes, honey," she replied, "when God wills it and your father arranges it." Arranges it. Not even that would be my choice. My husband would be chosen by my father, as if I were an object he needed to negotiate. And the worst part was, I believed that's how it was, that it was normal, that all girls lived that way. Only years later, when it was already too late, did I discover that other families, even poor ones like ours, let their daughters breathe a little, court with supervision, choose their own destinies. But not in Walter Hayes's house. No. In our house, the daughter was the father's property until she became the husband's property. And I was just Matilda, the girl who never got to be young, who never got to dream, who never got to choose. There was one sliver of light in those years, Mrs. Gable, the town librarian. She was an older woman who had never married and seemed to understand the hunger in my eyes. When my father wasn't looking, she would slip me books, Dickens, Austen, stories of women who saw the world. "Your body may be in this house, Matilda," she whispered to me once, handing me a worn copy of Jane Eyre. "But your mind is the one place they can never lock up. Don't you ever let that fire go out." She was my one true teacher, and her words became the armor I didn't know I would need. That is the one spark of hope in her entire world. Her father can lock her body in the house, but Mrs. Gable is arming her mind. Matilda has no idea how much she will need that armor, because she's about to discover that there is a fate much, much worse than just being a prisoner. Until I turned 20 and discovered there was something much worse than being a prisoner, who being sold. The years passed like dry leaves carried by the wind, and I remained there, in the same wooden house, watching life happen on the other side of the window. When I turned 17 inches 1,963, things became even more suffocating. Tilly is a young lady now. I heard my father comment to my mother one night, "We have to watch her more," as if he didn't watch me enough already. I couldn't even go to the well to get water alone. He'd send one of my brothers with me. "Daddy," I said one morning, gathering my courage, "all the girls my age are already courting. Can I at least talk to someone at church?" The look he gave me was as if I had committed the worst of sins. "Talk for what?" he asked, his voice thick with anger. "To look for trouble? To get people in town talking about you?" "It's not to look for trouble, Daddy," I insisted, trembling inside. "It's just that I feel so lonely here in the house." "Lonely?" he repeated, standing up from his chair. "You have a mother, You have brothers. You have a home. You have food. What loneliness is that? How could I explain to him that the loneliness wasn't a lack of people around, but a lack of freedom to be a person? Walter, my mother tried to intercede. The girl just wants. The girl just wants what she can't have, he cut her off, and she's not going to have it. A decent girl doesn't go chasing after men. The man comes after the girl when the time is right. The right time. But when would that right time be? At 18? At 20? At 30? Or never? I began to suspect that my father wanted to keep me a virgin and single forever, like some altar saint that couldn't be touched. In town, stories about me ran wild. That Hayes girl is strange. I'd hear some women comment at the market. She's already 17, and I've never seen her talking to a single boy. Must be something wrong with the girl, another would reply. Either that or her father is way too strict. If only they knew how much. My father treated my virginity as if it were the family's most precious asset. This girl will marry pure, he'd always repeat, or she won't marry at all. And I had no voice, no say, no choice. When I turned 18, the situation got strange. Mrs. Baker, our neighbor, came to talk to my mother. "Clara," she said, "there's a young man interested in Tilly." My heart sped up. Someone had noticed me. "Who is it?" my mother asked, curious. "It's Mr. Johnson's son from the store, Caleb. A hard-working boy from a good family. He wants to ask Walter for the girl's hand." Caleb. I knew him by sight. A handsome boy, about 22, who always greeted me politely when he saw me at church. But when my mother told my father, the answer was categorical. "No, why not, Walter?" she asked. "The girl is 18 now. The boy is from a good family." "Because I said so," he snapped. "Tilly isn't getting married yet. She's too young. Too young at 18? When would I be too old?" The other girls my age were already engaged, some even married, but I remained there, a prisoner of my father's obsession. "Mama," I cried that night, "why won't Daddy let me get married?" "Because he's afraid you'll suffer, honey," she tried to explain, but I could see she didn't understand it herself. "But I'm already suffering in here," I told her. "I'm dying a little bit at a time. Mama, I have no life." "Be patient," she whispered. "Someday he'll allow it. But what day would that be? When I was 30? 40? When it was already too late to start a family? Suitors appeared one by one, and my father rejected them all. There was the shoemaker's son, too poor, the rich farmer's nephew, too rich. He'll want to boss the girl around. The boy from the next county, too far. The boy from right here, too close, everyone will be watching. To my father, no man was good enough for his daughter. Or rather, no man deserved the treasure he kept under lock and key. Because that's how he saw me, as a precious object that couldn't be touched, used, lived. When I turned 19 inches 1,965, I was already resigned. "Mama," I said one afternoon, "I think I'm going to be an old maid." "Don't say that, Tilly," she replied, but there was worry in her eyes. "Your father will find someone for you, someone for me." As if I were incapable of finding someone for myself. As if I didn't have feelings, desires, a will of my own. I was just a doll on the shelf, waiting for someone to pick me. The nights were the worst. Lying in my bed, I'd listen to the sounds of the town outside. Young people talking, laughing, living. And me, there, a prisoner in my own home, a prisoner of my father's sick mind, a prisoner of a purity that no one had asked me if I wanted to preserve. God, I'd pray every night. Have you forgotten me? Why does my life have to be this way? But God seemed deaf to my pleas. Or maybe he was preparing something I couldn't yet imagine. During the day, I helped my mother around the house. I sewed, I embroidered, I cooked. I had become a perfect housewife without ever having a house of my own. I knew how to take care of everything, but I didn't know how to take care of myself. I knew how to please a husband, but I had never had a real conversation with a man. "Tilly," Mrs. Baker said to me one day, "don't you find it strange, not knowing any boys?" It was strange, yes, but what could I do? "My daddy doesn't allow it," I replied, lowering my head. But child, she insisted, how will you know if you like someone if you never talk to anyone? That was exactly what distressed me. How would I know what love was if I'd never felt my heart flutter? How would I know what I wanted in a husband if I'd never really met any man? I was going to get married blind, like a shot in the dark. But my father had his own logic. A woman who knows many men isn't worth anything, he'd say. A decent woman marries the first man her father chooses. Choose. Always that word. The woman never chooses. The father chooses. The husband chooses. And so, my dear, 1966 arrived, and I turned 20. 20 years of life. And it seemed I hadn't lived a single day. 20 years in the world. And I didn't know an inch of it. 20 years a woman, and still a frightened child, afraid of her own father. But it was exactly at 20 that my life took a turn I never imagined. It was when hunger knocked on our door, and my father discovered that even the most precious daughter can become a bargaining chip when need squeezes tight. 20 years old. When I reached that age in March of 1966, I looked at myself in the small piece of broken mirror in our room and saw a stranger staring back at me. It was a woman I didn't know, an adult's body, but a frightened child's soul. My God, I whispered to my own image, what have I become? I had breasts, I had hips, I had everything a woman was supposed to have, but inside I felt like a 10-year-old girl still waiting for her father's permission for everything. In those days, being a single woman at 20 was already cause for comment in town. A spinster aunt. Those words hurt like a knife in my chest. Mama, I asked one morning, what's wrong with me? My mother stopped sifting the flour and looked at me tenderly. There's nothing wrong with you, honey. Any man would be lucky to marry you. Then why does nobody want me? It's not that they don't want you, she sighed. It's that your father doesn't let anyone get close. And it was true. At 20 years old, I had never had a real kiss. I had never held a boy's hand. I had never felt those butterflies in my stomach that other women talked about when they liked someone. It was as if a part of me had been ripped out before it was even born. Clara, I heard my father talking to my mother one night. The girl is being left on the shelf. On the shelf. Like a boat that gets stuck in the sand and can't sail. Walter, my mother replied, you don't accept a single suitor. How is she going to get married if you scare them all away? Because no one suitable has shown up yet, he grumbled. It's just kids with no future or shameless old men. No future. Shameless. To my father, all men were either too young or too old, too poor or too rich, too much of this or too much of that. It was never right. That same year, another suitor appeared, Ethan Moore, a 5-year-old merchant's son who had seen me at church and taken an interest in me. Walter, his father, came to talk. My son wants to marry your daughter. My heart sped up when I found out. Ethan was handsome, hard-working, from a known family. But when my father returned from the talk, the answer was the same as always. He's not suitable. Why isn't he suitable, Daddy? I dared to ask. Because I know the family. His father is a womanizer. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. My father saw evil in everything and everyone. If the boy was single, it was because he was irresponsible. If he was a widower, it was because he didn't know how to take care of his first wife. If he came from a rich family, he would mistreat me. If he came from a poor family, he wouldn't support me. Mama, I cried that night, I'm going to die an old maid. No, honey, she tried to console me. God will send someone for you. But what God was this, who let a daughter wither in her father's house while life rushed by? The other women my age were already living their lives. Sarah Johnson, my friend from church, already had 2 children. Rose Miller was already pregnant with her 3rd. Emily Davis had been widowed and was already flirting again. And I was still there, inexperienced, like a flower that never saw the Sunday Tilly. Mrs. Scott, a neighbor, said to me one day, aren't you curious about those things between a man and a woman? Curious? I was dying of curiosity, but how could I talk about it? I confessed, blushing. But my daddy says you only learn those things after you're married. Child, she laughed. But how will you know if you're going to like your husband if you don't even know what he's like? That's exactly what tormented me. How would I know if I was compatible with someone if we couldn't exchange a word alone? At night, I would lie awake imagining what it would be like to have a husband, what it would be like to share a bed with someone, to talk about the day's problems, to have children, to build a family. But they were vague, formless dreams, because I had no reference for what intimacy between a man and a woman was. "Mama," I asked one day, gathering all my courage, "what is it like, the things between a husband and wife?" My mother turned red as a tomato. "Tilly," she said, scandalized, "you'll learn those things when you get married. It's not a topic for a single young lady." But all the other single young ladies knew something. They had all had at least one secret beau. They had exchanged a few kisses, felt some emotions. Only I lived in that glass bell jar, protected from everything, even from life itself. At 20, I knew how to embroider, sew, cook, wash, iron, and clean a house. I knew how to take care of children because I helped mind the neighbors' little ones. I knew everything a wife needed to know, except the most important part: how to be a woman. Tilly. Caleb, Mr. Johnson's son from the store, tried to talk to me after service. "Can I speak with you?" My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. It was the first time a boy had tried to talk to me alone. "I can't," I said quickly. "My daddy doesn't allow it." "But just one word," he insisted. "I wanted to ask you if, Tilly." My father's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Come here, girl." Caleb walked away quickly, and I followed with my head down, feeling people staring, whispering. "What did that kid want?" my father asked when we got home. "Nothing, Daddy. He was just going to say hello." Hello, nothing. A man who approaches a woman wants other things. "I don't want to see you talking to him again." Other things. What were these other things that were so dangerous? Why was my father so afraid to let me find out? Were these other things so bad? Or were they so good that he was afraid I'd like them and want more? "Walter," I heard my mother say one night, "don't you think it's time to find someone for Tilly? The girl is 20 years old now." "When the time is right, I'll find someone," he replied. "But it has to be someone who deserves her, who will take good care of her, take good care of me, as if I were a porcelain vase that could break with any rough movement, as if I had no will of my own, as if I couldn't choose who would make me happy." And so, my dear, I reached the end of 1,966 20 years old. A virgin not just in body, but in soul. A virgin of experiences, of emotions, of life. A woman-child who didn't even know what she wanted because she'd never had the chance to find out. But life has its cruel ironies. When we least expect it, it turns upside down. And it was exactly when I had given up on dreaming that need knocked on our door and changed everything. It was in early 1966 that our life turned upside down. The drought hit hard that year, the kind that makes a Southerner understand the true meaning of the word desperation. Mr. Harold Vance's cattle began to die, and with them, so did my father's job. "Walter," said the boss one morning, taking off his hat as a sign of respect, "you're a good hand, but I have no way to pay anyone anymore. The farm is broke." My father came home that day with the saddest face I had ever seen in my life. "And now, Walter?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Now we'll manage," he replied, but I could see he didn't know how. At 52, my father had never done anything other than work cattle. He couldn't read, couldn't write, had no trade. The first few months were difficult, but still bearable. My mother sewed more intensely. My brothers looked for work here and there, and we survived on the little we had. But when May of that year arrived, the situation became desperate. "There's nothing left," my mother said one night, showing the empty pantry tin. "The flour is gone, the beans are gone, there's only a handful of corn left. Corn that we ate boiled instead of rice, that we mixed with water instead of milk." "Mama," I said, "I can get a job. I know how to sew. I can wash clothes for people." "A girl from a good family doesn't work outside the home," my father cut in sharply. "What will people think? What would they think? That we were poor. But we were already poor anyway. What difference did it make?" "Walter," my mother tried to argue, "things are bad. If Tilly earns a few dollars?" "No. He slammed his fist on the table. My daughter is not going to become a servant for others. As long as I have strength in my arms, I'll provide for my family. But what strength was that if there was no work? What provision was that if there was no food? My father was letting his pride speak louder than our need, and we were all paying the price. A week later, the situation became critical. We went 2 days eating nothing but sugar water. The younger boys, my brothers, cried from hunger. I felt my stomach empty, my head dizzy, my legs weak. "Walter," my mother begged, "let the girl work. It's just until things get better." "Absolutely not," he insisted. "I'll find a way." But what way? Where was he going to get money if he didn't accept help from anyone? It was a Thursday that everything changed. I was in the yard hanging the few rags we still had to wash when I heard voices in the living room. My father was talking to someone, but he was speaking too low for me to understand. "Tilly," he called me after the visitor left. "Come here." I went with a heavy heart because his voice was different, laden with a sadness I had never heard before. "Sit there," he said, pointing to the cane-backed chair. I sat, my hands trembling, without knowing why. "Honey," he began, unable to look me in the eye. An opportunity has come up for you." "What kind of opportunity, Daddy?" "A man wants to marry you." My heart leaped. Finally, after so many rejected suitors, my father had accepted someone. "Who is it, Daddy? Do I know him?" It's Arthur Shaw." Arthur Shaw. I knew that name, but not for good reasons. "Daddy," I said slowly, "Arthur Shaw. Isn't that the older man who lives on the big farm? That's him." I felt a chill down my spine. Arthur Shaw was 45 years old, almost my father's age. He was known in town as a rich but strange man. He lived alone on the farm, never married, never went with anyone, as far as people knew. "But Daddy," I stammered, "he's so much older than me. He's old enough to be my father." "Age isn't what matters," my father said, still not looking at me. "What matters is that he's a good man. He has money, he can take care of you, but I don't even know him, Daddy. I've never spoken to that man in my life." "You don't need to know him beforehand. Marriage is like that. You get to know him after. After. Always after. Get married first. Get to know each other after, like each other after, be happy after. And if I don't like him, you'll come to like him. He's a good man, hard-working, has a farm, has cattle, has money, money." That word my father repeated 3 times. That's when I understood. This wasn't about whether I liked him or not. This was about need. "Daddy," I whispered, feeling the tears well up, "are you selling me?" The silence that followed was the answer. My father hung his head, his hands trembling. "It's not selling, honey, it's arranging your future. Arranging my future, or saving the family from starvation." He looked at me then, and I saw tears in his eyes too. "Tilly," he said, his voice cracking, "you don't know how much it hurts a father's heart to have to do this. But there's no other way. Yes, there is, Daddy. I can work. I can help another way. Work where? Doing what? You don't know how to do anything but housework. Then teach me. Let me learn." "There's no time. The situation is critical. If it's not now, if it weren't for what? We were going to starve to death? Was it that bad? How much did he offer?" I asked, my voice coming out harder than I intended. "Tilly, how much, Daddy?" $2,000, he whispered. $2,000. At this moment, Matilda isn't a daughter. She's a transaction, sold by the father who claimed to protect her. She's being sent into what she believes is a living hell, but the secret awaiting her in Arthur Shaw's house is more painful and more freeing than anyone in town could possibly imagine. Many people now would surely think, "Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you scream?" Oh, my dear, when you've been locked in a cage for 20 years, you forget you even have wings. I was terrified, yes, but I didn't even know that having another choice was possible. That was a lot of money back then, enough money to keep the family for several months. And all he wanted in return was a wife. "And if I refuse?" "You can't refuse," my father said. "I've already given my word." He had already given his word, without asking for mine. He had already committed me, without me knowing. He had already decided my future, without my participation. Does Mama know about this? I asked. Your mother. Your mother agrees it's the best thing for you. A lie. When I looked into her eyes, peeking from the kitchen, I saw she was suffering just as much as I was. When is the wedding? Next Saturday. Next Saturday. Just 9 days from now. So soon? He wants to get it settled quickly. And we need to get it settled quickly, too. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. 20 years waiting for love. 20 years dreaming of a Prince Charming, and I was going to marry out of necessity to a man I didn't even know, who was old enough to be my father. Mama, I sobbed in her lap. I'm scared. I know, honey, she cried with me. I'm scared too, but sometimes life forces us to do things we don't want to. Why does it have to be me? Why can't one of my brothers find a way? Because your brothers are men. A man doesn't get married to solve family problems. A woman does. A woman does. As if it were our destiny to be bargaining chips, solutions to problems we didn't create. That was the moment, my dear, when I felt worse than an object. I wondered, God, have you forgotten me? I thought it was the end of my life, but as it turns out, it was the very first door opening. But what I didn't know yet was that the man I was going to marry kept a secret. A secret that explained why at 45 he had never been interested in any woman. A secret that would make our story very different from what anyone could imagine. Arthur Shaw was a walking mystery in the town of Harmony Creek. At 45, tall, broad-shouldered, with well-kept grayish hair and brown eyes that always seemed sad, he aroused curiosity and gossip wherever he went. Why do you suppose that man never got married? The women at the market would whisper. It's not for lack of money, he has plenty of that. Or for lack of looks, another would add. The man is well built, then he must be. Strange. Strange. The speculation ran rampant through the town streets. Some said he was sick with something contagious. Others swore he had killed someone in the past, and that's why he lived in isolation. The more malicious ones whispered that he didn't like women, that his interests lay elsewhere. Arthur lived on a farm 3 miles out, in a large brick house with a wide porch and a well-kept garden. He had land, cattle, employees, everything a man could want in those days. But he lived alone. Alone with an old housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, who took care of the house. Mr. Arthur is a good man. Mrs. Davis would always defend him when she heard the gossip in town. He treats everyone well, pays fairly, doesn't harm a soul. Then why doesn't he get married, Mrs. Davis? They'd ask. Ah, only he can answer that. And what no one knew, what Arthur guarded as the biggest secret of his life, was the real reason he had never gotten close to any woman. It wasn't for lack of desire. It wasn't because he was sick. It wasn't because he preferred men. It was out of shame. Arthur had been born with a problem that, in those days, had no scientific name, no medical explanation, no treatment. It was simply a curse he carried between his legs. A birth defect he discovered in his adolescence, and that had tormented him ever since. His private parts were disproportionately small. Not just small, but minuscule, the size of a small child's. When the other boys his age began to develop, to talk about women, to brag about their conquests, Arthur realized he was different. My God, he cried at 16, looking at himself in the mirror. What did you do to me? He tried to talk to his father, but old Mr. Shaw was a rough man, the kind who didn't talk about those things. Stop that sissy talk, boy, was all he said. Everyone is born as God wills it. As God wills it. But why did God want him to be like this? Why did he have to bear this cross that no woman would ever accept? Why did he have to live condemned to eternal loneliness? In his teens, Arthur tried a few times to get close to a girl, but he always backed out at the last minute. What if she finds out, he'd think. What if she tells everyone? What if she laughs at me? The shame was greater than any desire. Arthur, his father said when he turned 25, "When are you going to give me grandchildren?" "Someday, Dad," he'd reply, but he knew that day would never come. How could he provide grandchildren if he couldn't even think about getting undressed in front of a woman? The years went by, and Arthur became more and more isolated. He built a prosperous farm, accumulated wealth, but couldn't build a family. Every time he saw couples in town, he felt a pang in his chest. Every time he heard babies crying, he imagined what it would be like to have children. Mr. Arthur, Mrs. Davis said to him when he turned 40, "Aren't you thinking about getting married? This house needs a lady." "I'm not, Mrs. Davis," he'd reply. "Marriage isn't for me." "But why, Mr. Arthur? You're a good, hard-working man." How could he explain that the problem wasn't being good or hard-working? How could he say the problem was in what he couldn't show, in what he couldn't offer? How could he confess that he felt less of a man than any teenager in town? The nights were the worst. Alone in the large farmhouse bedroom, Arthur would look at himself in the mirror and try to imagine what it would be like if he were normal. If I were like other men, he'd think, I'd have a wife by now, I'd have children, I'd have a real life. It was when he turned 43 that the loneliness began to become unbearable. "Mrs. Davis," he said one morning, "do you think any woman would marry me, even if I'm different?" "Different how, Mr. Arthur?" He couldn't answer. How could he explain without dying of shame? Different. Just different. Everyone's different, Mr. Arthur. The important thing is to have a good heart. A good heart, he had. But would it be enough? It was then he began to think of a solution he had never considered before. What if he found a woman who would marry him out of necessity, not love? A woman who needed financial security more than other things. A woman who might even be relieved not to have to fulfill all her conjugal duties. If I could find a wife like that, he thought, at least I wouldn't die alone. At least I'd have company, someone to talk to, someone to take care of the house. It wouldn't be love, but it would be better than eternal loneliness. It was when he learned of Walter Hayes's family situation that he saw an opportunity. His daughter, Matilda, was 20. She was a good family girl, pretty, hard-working, but still single. And the family was in dire straits. Maybe, he thought, this is the chance I've waited for my whole life. A young, inexperienced girl who won't have high expectations. A family in need that won't ask too many questions. A situation that could solve everyone's problem. "Mr. Hayes," he said, when he went to make the proposal, "I want to marry your daughter." He saw the astonishment in the man's eyes. "I know I'm old enough to be her father," he continued, "but I promise to take good care of her, give her everything she needs, treat her with respect." "And what do you want in return?" Walter asked, suspicious. "Just a wife," Arthur replied. "Someone for company, to take care of the house, to have a family." He didn't lie. He just didn't tell the whole truth. $2,000, he offered, knowing it was an amount the family couldn't refuse. "And I'll pay for the wedding, buy the girl's trousseau, take care of everything." It was a lot of money, much more than any normal dowry. When Walter accepted, Arthur felt a mixture of relief and terror. He was finally going to get married. He finally wouldn't die alone. But what would the wedding night be like? How was he going to explain it to the girl? How was he going to face the disappointment in her eyes? "Mrs. Davis," he said when he returned home. "I'm getting married. Praise the Lord," she exclaimed. "To whom?" "To Walter Hayes's daughter, Matilda. The girl is young, Mr. Arthur. Will you know how to make her happy?" Make her happy. If only she knew he wasn't expecting happiness, just companionship. If only she knew he didn't want passion, just someone who wouldn't leave when they discovered the truth. If only she knew he was willing to pay any price not to die alone. In the days that followed, Arthur prepared everything for the wedding with obsessive care. He bought the best fabric in town for the bride's dress. He ordered a cake, sweets, drinks. He hired a fiddle player to liven up the party. He wanted everything to be perfect. Maybe, he thought, if I make her happy in every other way, she'll forgive what I can't give. Maybe kindness would compensate for anatomy. Maybe generosity would compensate for inadequacy. Maybe respect would compensate for disappointment. But deep down, very deep down, Arthur knew he was fooling himself. He knew that no 20-year-old woman was going to be satisfied with affection and money. He knew that sooner or later, she would find out and leave. Or worse, she would stay out of obligation, unhappy for the rest of her life. My God, he prayed every night. Help me make this girl happy. Help me be the husband she deserves, even if I can't be the man she expects. And so, my dear, two human beings walked toward a marriage arranged by circumstances. She, a 20-year-old girl who had never kissed anyone, sold out of necessity. He, a 4-5-year-old man who had never undressed in front of anyone, buying companionship with money. Neither of them knew what awaited them. Neither of them imagined that from this improbable meeting, something unexpected would be born. Understanding, acceptance, and, who knows, love. The day of the 28th of January 1967 dawned cloudy in Tennessee, as if even the sky was sad about what was about to happen. It was my wedding day, but I felt nothing close to joy. It was more like I was going to my own funeral. Tilly, my mother, called me early. Come have breakfast so we can get you ready. But how could I eat breakfast when my stomach was in knots? How could I pretend things were normal when my entire life was being decided by other people? The dress Arthur had made was beautiful, I can't deny it. White satin with delicate lace, a hand-tatted tulle veil with tiny flowers. You look as pretty as a princess, Mama said with tears in her eyes as she helped me dress. Princess? If I were a real princess, I'd be marrying for love, not necessity. If I were a princess, I'd be happy, radiant, eager to meet my prince. But she's not a princess. She's a sacrifice. As Matilda puts on the beautiful dress Arthur bought, she's preparing for a life of misery. What she can't possibly know is that the man waiting for her isn't a monster. He's just as frightened as she is, and he's hiding a secret that will change everything. Instead, I was there, trembling with fear, not knowing if it was fear of the unknown or fear of discovering things I didn't want to know. Honey, my father said, entering the room when I was almost ready. You look pretty and sad, I thought, but I didn't say anything. Tilly, he continued, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I know this isn't easy for you. Then why don't you stop all of this? I asked, still hopeful. Because I can't, honey. A man's word is sacred. And besides, he paused, looking at his own hands. There's no other way. There was no other way. That phrase that would haunt me for the rest of my life. How many bad decisions do we make because there's no other way? How many times do we give in to fate because we see no alternative? The Harmony Creek Community Church was full. It seemed the entire town had come to see Walter Hayes's girl marry the most mysterious man in the region. Everyone came out of curiosity, my cousin Teresa whispered. They all want to see how it's going to be. How it was going to be. I wanted to know too. When the organ began to play the wedding march, I felt my legs go weak. Courage, honey, my father said, giving me his arm. God knows what he's doing. God knows what he's doing. But did he really? Was it his plan for me to marry a stranger? Was it his will for me to become merchandise in my own father's hands? I walked down the church aisle like a ghost. People stared, whispered, pointed. Such a pretty girl. What an age difference. Do you think she's happy? She looks a little pale. Must be nervous. Nervous was an understatement. I was terrified. And when I reached the altar and saw Arthur standing there in a dark suit, hair combed with pomade, looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, I almost fainted. He was handsome, I couldn't deny it. For a 4-5-year-old man, he was well preserved. Tall, elegant posture, a serious face, but not unpleasant. If it were just a matter of appearance, I would have nothing to complain about. Matilda Hayes, the preacher, began the ceremony. Do you take Arthur Shaw to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and to cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, till death do you part? Till death do you part. I looked at Arthur and saw that he was nervous too. His hands were trembling slightly, and there was a bead of sweat on his forehead. At least it wasn't just me who was scared. I do, I answered, my voice coming out weak. Arthur Shaw, the preacher continued, do you take Matilda Hayes to be your lawfully wedded wife? And he answered, I do, with a firm, decisive voice, as if he truly wanted this. The rings were exchanged, the kiss was given. My first kiss, ever, there at the altar, in front of everyone. Without love, without desire, just following protocol. His lips were warm, soft, but I didn't feel those butterflies in my stomach that other women talked about. I now pronounce you man and wife. Done. It was done. In 5 minutes, my entire life had changed. I was no longer Matilda Hayes, daughter of Walter. I was Matilda Shaw, wife of Arthur. The reception was at my parents' house, right in the yard, with tables borrowed from neighbors and food that Arthur paid for. The fiddle player played, people danced, everyone seemed happy, except me and the groom. Congratulations, Tilly. People came to congratulate me. May God bless you. May you be very happy. Happy. Everyone wished happiness for a couple that barely knew each other, who had married out of convenience. Arthur stayed by my side the entire party, polite, attentive, introducing me to people as my wife. My wife. 2 words that sounded strange on his lips, as if he didn't believe it himself. I glanced over at my family. My mother was weeping silently into a handkerchief, and my brothers, James, Michael, Robert, Daniel, and Thomas. They were standing near my father, looking down at their boots. Not one of them met my gaze. In that moment, I understood what my father's rule truly meant. It wasn't just that girls were prisoners, it was that his sons were his soldiers. Their loyalty was to him, not to their sister. Their silence was the final lock on my cage. "Matilda," he said to me during the party, "are you all right? You look tired." It was the first time he had spoken to me directly all day. "I'm fine," I lied. How could I be fine on the most terrifying day of my life? "If you want, we can leave early," he offered. Leave? To where? To his house, which was now my house too. To his room, which was now our room. To his bed where, oh God, I couldn't even think about it. "No need," I replied quickly. "We can stay a little longer." Because the more time at the party, the less time alone with him. The more party, the less intimate talk. The more people around, the less chance of having to face reality. But every party ends, and ours ended when it was past 10 o'clock at night. "Well," said Arthur, "I think it's time. The hour that every bride fears and desires at the same time, except I only feared it." "Tilly," my mother kissed me, crying. "Be happy, honey. And remember, be obedient to your husband. He will take good care of you. Obedient." Another word that amazed me, as if I were a pet that had changed owners. "Take good care of my daughter," my father said to Arthur, shaking his hand. "You can count on it, Mr. Hayes. I'll treat her like a queen." And that was the last time I truly felt like his daughter. Many people ask if I forgave my father. Forgiveness is a long journey, my dear. The love was still there, but that day he sold me. It built an invisible wall. We never truly went back to how things were. A prisoner queen, I thought, but I said nothing. The old Ford truck that took us to his farm was the most silent journey of my life. Me, sitting next to him, watching the dark road, trying not to think about what would happen when we got home. "Matilda," he said halfway there, "I know this is all strange for you." Strange was an understatement, but I want you to know that I'm going to do everything to make you feel comfortable in our home. Our home. As if it were mine too, when I had never even set foot there. "Thank you," was all I managed to reply. What else could I say? That I was dying of fear? That I wanted to go back to my parents' house? That I didn't want to be anyone's wife? When we arrived at the farm, I was impressed. It really was a large, beautiful house with a garden, a wide porch, all very well kept. "Welcome to your home," Arthur said, giving me his hand to help me down from the truck. Mrs. Matilda, Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper, greeted me at the door. What a joy to have a new lady of the house. Lady of the house, another new word to get used to. At 20, I had become the lady of a house I didn't even know. Mrs. Davis prepared the room, Arthur said, and I felt my heart race. The room. The moment I feared most was arriving. "If you want to take a look around the house first." "No," I replied too quickly. "I'm tired. Better to go to sleep." Sleep. As if that were all that was going to happen in the room. As if it weren't our wedding night. The night I was going to stop being a girl and become a woman. The night all of life's mysteries were going to be revealed. "Well," Arthur said, stopping at the bedroom door. "This is our room now. Our room. A large, comfortable, king-sized bed of dark wood. A mirror. Everything very nice. But all I saw was the bed. That bed where? Matilda," he said, and there was something different in his voice, something that sounded like fear. "I need to talk to you before we go to bed." "Talk about what?" "About how it was going to be. About what he expected of me." "You can speak," I said, my voice trembling. And it was then that Arthur told me the secret he had kept for almost 30 years. The secret that would change everything between us. Arthur stood in the bedroom doorway for what felt like an eternity, his hands trembling, his face pale as if he were about to faint. "Matilda," he said finally, "sit there on the bed. I need to tell you something very important." I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "What is it?" I asked, preparing for the worst. Was he sick? Did he have something contagious? Was that why he'd never married? He walked to the window, stood with his back to me, looking at the starry sky. "Matilda," he began, his voice trembling, "you must be wondering why a man my age, never married, never had a girlfriend, always lived alone." It was true. Ever since I found out I was going to marry him, that question hadn't left my mind. "You must have your reasons," I replied, trying to sound calm. "Everyone has their reasons. Yes," he sighed. "I have my reasons, and you need to know them before we are truly husband and wife. Truly husband and wife." I felt a shiver just imagining what that meant. "Matilda." He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I have a problem. A problem that I'm very ashamed of. A problem. What kind of problem could a man have that would shame him so much? I was born different from other men," he continued, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Different how?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my fear. "Matilda, my private parts. They're very small." Small. I didn't quite understand what he meant. In those days, a girl from a good family knew nothing about the male body, about those intimate things. "Small how?" I asked naively. Arthur hung his head, his hands covering his face. "The size of a small child's, even smaller. That's why I never married. Never had a girlfriend. Never been with any woman. She was prepared for cruelty, for pain, or for disgust. But not for this. Not for vulnerability." In one single confession, Arthur has just handed this 20-year-old girl all the power in their relationship. What he offers her next, though, is the one thing she's never been given in her entire life. "But is that a serious problem?" I asked, still not fully understanding. "Yes, Matilda. It's a very serious problem, because a husband has to satisfy his wife. And I can't satisfy a wife." I didn't really know what that meant, but from the sadness in his eyes, it had to be something very important. "And why did you marry me then?" I asked. "Why?" He sighed deeply. "Because I can't stand living alone anymore. Because I wanted to have someone to talk to, someone for company, someone to care for and be cared for by. But I can't offer you what a normal husband offers." "And what does a normal husband offer?" The question slipped out before I could think. Arthur looked at me, surprised. You really don't know?" "I don't know. No one ever explained those things to me." It was then he did something that surprised me. He smiled. For the first time since we'd met, I saw a real smile on his face. "Then maybe," he said slowly, "maybe this isn't the end of the world I imagined." "Why not?" I asked, confused. "Because if you don't know what you're missing, maybe you won't miss it so much." He walked over to the bed, sat down beside me. "Matilda, can I ask you a question?" "Yes. Do you feel desire for men? Do you feel the urge to be touched, kissed, and those things?" I blushed to the roots of my hair. How could I answer a question like that? I don't know," I stammered. I've never thought about it. You never felt anything when you looked at a boy? No, I answered honestly. My daddy never let me get close to any boy. I've never had a real conversation with any man, besides my brothers and him. Arthur fell silent, thoughtful. So, you truly don't know what you'd be missing? He asked, almost hopeful. I've only ever felt curiosity, I admitted. Not desire. He nodded slowly. I'm the opposite, he confessed, looking away. I felt desire. A lot of desire to know a woman, to have a family, but I was always terrified of this part, the intimate part. I was afraid of the shame. And now? I asked. Now that you've told me your secret, what? Now, I don't know, he admitted. It depends on you. It depends on whether you can accept an incomplete husband. Incomplete. I looked at this 5-year-old man, crying in shame in front of me, feeling less of a man because of something he couldn't control. And I felt something I had never felt before. Pity. Not cruel pity, but a tender pity. Arthur, I said, using his name for the first time, you've suffered a lot because of this, haven't you? My whole life, he admitted. I've always felt less of a man than the others, always been ashamed, always lived in hiding, and no one ever knew, just me and God. And now, now me, a 20-year-old girl who knew nothing about life. Now I held the biggest secret of a 5-year-old man. Matilda, he asked, his voice full of hope and fear. Can you accept this? Can you stay with me, even knowing that our marriage will be different? Different. I looked at this man who had bought me as a wife, but who now showed himself to be as vulnerable as I was. Different how? I asked. Without physical intimacy, he explained, blushing. Without children. Without those things that other couples have without children. That hurt a little, because every woman dreams of being a mother. But at the same time, I felt a strange relief. You mean, you're not going to demand that I? No, he said quickly. I'm not going to demand anything you don't want to give. We can be partners, friends, take care of each other, but only if you want to. Did you hear that? For the first time in her life, Matilda is being given a choice. The man who bought her is the only one who ever asked what she wanted. Her decision right here will set the course for the rest of her life. Let's see what she does with this new, terrifying freedom. Only if I wanted to. For the first time in my life, someone was asking me what I wanted. Not what my father wanted, not what was expected of me, but what I, Matilda, desired. And, if I accept? I asked. How will it be? We'll live like two friends sharing the same house. You'll be the lady of the farm. You'll have everything you need. You'll be treated with respect and affection. And in return? In return? He insisted. In return? Give me company. Talk to me. Have coffee with me. Help me not feel so alone in the world. Company. Was that what he wanted to buy with the $2,000? Just company. Arthur, I said slowly, can I ask you a question? Yes. Why? Why did you choose me? Why not an older woman? A widow who was also alone? Because, he sighed, a woman with experience. She would know I'm not a complete man. She'd feel unsatisfied. She'd leave me or cheat on me. You, being young, with no experience, I thought maybe you could get used to it. Get used to it. As if I were an animal that could be trained to accept any situation. But looking at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his gestures, I didn't feel anger. I felt something akin to understanding. Arthur, I said, can I sleep on it? To think it over? Of course, he stood up quickly. I'll sleep in the guest room. You stay here. Rest. And we'll talk tomorrow. As he was leaving, I called him. Arthur? Yes? Thank you. For telling me the truth. It must have been very difficult. He looked at me with a gratitude so deep it almost made me cry. "Thank you," he said, for not, running out screaming. After he left, I lay down on the king-sized bed, still in my wedding dress. I did not think. I did not feel. I had expected cruelty, or pain, or disgust. I had not prepared for. Nothing. The relief I thought I would feel wasn't there. The fear wasn't gone. It had just frozen. I had been my father's prisoner, and now I was Arthur's. It was just a different kind of cage, a larger, quieter one. I was 20 years old, a wife, and completely, terrifyingly numb. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, feeling not like a woman, but like a ghost in a new house. Can you understand that feeling? That numbness? I had prepared myself for a monster, but instead, I got a broken man, just as frightened as I was. And right there, in that terrifying night, I felt nothing, just quiet, cold numbness. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of him leaving the guest room. I stayed in our room. I stayed there for 3 days, only coming out when he was gone. Mrs. Davis would leave me meals, her eyes full of pity, but she never asked. The first weeks were a silent, agonizing routine. We were 2 ghosts in a large house. We ate at the same table in complete silence. He would read his newspaper. I would stare at my plate. I felt his shame and my own isolation like a thick fog between us. I was not a wife. I was not a prisoner. I was a witness. During the days, I explored the house. And then I found it, his library. It was the only room that felt alive. I remembered Mrs. Gable's words. "Your mind is the one place they can never lock up." I began to read. I read for weeks. I read to forget I was 20 and married to a secret. I read to feel alive. One night, about a month into our marriage, I heard a terrible sound. A crash, then a groan. I found Arthur at the bottom of the stairs, delirious with fever, his leg bent at a terrible angle. "Water," he mumbled, his face pale with pain. For the first time, my numbness broke. It was replaced by purpose. "Mrs. Davis!" I yelled. "Call the doctor, now!" For the next 2 weeks, I did not leave his side. The doctor set his leg, but the fever was stubborn. I was the one who bathed his forehead, forced broth into his mouth, and changed his sweat-drenched linens. He was helpless, his shame burned away by the fever. He was just a man in pain. And I was just a woman who knew how to care for people. One afternoon, his fever finally broke. He woke and saw me sitting in the chair by his bed, asleep, a book open on my lap. You stayed," he whispered. His voice was hoarse. "I'm your wife," I said, waking up. He didn't look at me with shame. He looked at me with gratitude. "Why are you reading David Copperfield?" he asked. "Because I found it in your library. It's about a boy who survived," I answered honestly. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It is, but the ones about farming, in the study, they teach you how to build." That was the real beginning. Not a deal, not a partnership. It was a fever and a book. The next week, he was still in bed, but he asked me to bring him the farm ledgers. "If you're going to read," he said, his voice stronger, "you might as well read something useful. Let me teach you. Let me teach you how we run this place." And I let him. I sat on the floor by his bed, and my husband, my partner, began to teach me how to be free. My father locked me up to keep me pure, but the husband who bought me, he was the one who handed me the key. He didn't give me the passion girls dream of, but he gave me respect. He taught me how to be in charge of my own life. You see, my dears, love comes in many forms. It was a different kind of love than people expected, but it was love. Love based on respect, on understanding, on mutual acceptance. And I discovered that was stronger than any passion, that we really were going to spend our whole lives together, building something different, more solid, something people didn't understand, but that worked for us. It was after 6 months of marriage that Mrs. Davis made a comment that made me think. "Mrs. Matilda," she said while I was helping in the kitchen, "you look very happy. You've got a sparkle in your eye you didn't have when you arrived." It was true. I felt useful, respected, heard. Arthur asked my opinion on everything, from the color of the new curtains to decisions about buying cattle. He treated me like a partner, not an ornament. "Mrs. Davis?" I asked. "Do you find our marriage strange?" She stopped peeling potatoes and looked at me fondly. "Strange? Why, honey?" "For being different from other couples." "Child," she chuckled, "every couple has their own way. The important thing is that you respect each other, take care of each other, and are happy together. And you two are? And what about children?" I pressed. "Don't you think something's missing?" "Children come in many ways," Mrs. Davis replied wisely. "They don't always have to come from the mother's belly." And so, a year after our wedding, we decided to adopt our first child. It sounds all too simple, doesn't it? Of course, there was paperwork, there were difficulties, but in those days, Arthur was a man of standing. He was wealthy and respected. And perhaps God, in His mercy, also knew that. We needed those children just as much as they needed us. We drove to an orphanage in Nashville. As we stood in the hallway, I saw a small, 7-year-old girl named Ella Grace watching us from a doorway, her eyes full of the same quiet fear I once had. My father had arranged me. Arthur had bought me. I was property that had been negotiated. I knelt down. "My name is Matilda," I said. "We aren't here to get a child. We're here to see if there is someone who would choose us." What a powerful moment. Matilda sees herself in that little girl's fear and completely breaks the cycle of her own past. By giving Ella the choice, Matilda is finally healing herself, and this is how their unconventional house truly becomes a home. She stared at me, and for the first time, she stepped out of the shadow. When we brought Ella home, Arthur looked at me, tears in his eyes. We did a good thing," he stammered. "We did," I said, holding our daughter's hand. "That day, we didn't just give her a home. I finally got one for myself." Of course, bringing Ella home set the town's tongues wagging all over again. First, the strange marriage, now this. I overheard Mrs. Baker herself whispering at the market. "Taking in another's child. Can't she give him one of his own?" The gossip that used to define and imprison me now seemed small. I looked at Arthur, who was proudly buying Ella a peppermint stick, completely unbothered. I realized their whispers couldn't touch us. They were on the outside of a fortress of acceptance we had built, and they didn't have the key. That's right. My home wasn't the place I was born. My home was the place where I was chosen, and where I was allowed to choose. When I looked into Ella's frightened eyes, I saw myself. And when I took her little hand, I was finally taking hold of my own life. And just like that, we became a real family. "Arthur," I said one night, after putting Ella to bed, "Thank you. Thank you. For what?" "For showing me that love has many forms, that a family can be built in different ways." "No," he replied, "thank you. For showing me that size doesn't matter. Size doesn't matter." That phrase became our motto. Arthur wasn't less of a man because of his physical problem, just as I wasn't less of a woman for not having biological children. 2 years later, we adopted 2 more children. Liam, who was 5, and Mia, just 2. Our house filled with life, with noise, with joy. The children completed us in a way I never thought possible. We were an imperfect family in everyone's eyes, a husband who wasn't whole, a wife who couldn't bear children. But we chose each other, and we chose our children. And a chosen love, my dear, is stronger than any obligation. "Daddy," Liam asked one day, "why do you and Mama sleep in the same bed but don't make noise at night like my friends' parents?" Arthur turned red, but he answered honestly, "Because every couple has their own way of showing love, son." I put my hand on his. "And we love each other very much," I added, and I realized just how true it was. "Oh, okay then," Liam said, satisfied. In a different way, but deeply. "Oh, okay then," Liam said, satisfied. To the children, it was that simple. But our partnership, built on ledgers and respect, still had its ghosts. There were nights, years into our marriage, when I would wake to find Arthur's side of the bed empty. I would find him on the porch, just staring into the dark. I didn't have to ask. I knew he was thinking about the man he wasn't. I'd just bring him a blanket and sit with him. "You taught me how to run a farm, Arthur," I told him once on such a night. "You taught me how to be free. That's more real than anything else." He squeezed my hand, and we sat in a silence that was more comforting than any words. Over the years, our farm prospered. Arthur taught me everything about the business, and I discovered I had a knack for management. "You have a better head for numbers than I do," he'd admit. "I'm proud of my wife." My wife. The words that sounded forced at first now came out naturally, affectionately. We truly were husband and wife, just in our own unique way. "Matilda," he said one night when we were celebrating 10 years of marriage, "do you regret anything?" "Not a thing," I answered without hesitation. "And you?" "Only one thing." My heart tightened. "What's that?" "Not meeting you sooner. I wasted 45 years of my life in fear and shame. But if you had met me sooner, I would have been a child. I wouldn't have had the maturity to understand, to accept, to build this us that we have." "That's true," he smiled. "Maybe everything happened at just the right time." "And my father, Walter? We saw him at church, at town gatherings. He was polite, as was I. He saw my children, my beautiful home. He once visited, looked around the porch Arthur and I had added, and said, 'See, girl, I told you he'd take good care of you. A father knows best.' He said it with pride, as if he had engineered this happiness, not just the desperate transaction that started it. I just nodded and offered him some tea. I didn't have the words, or perhaps the will, to explain that what he saw wasn't the result of his arrangement. It was the result of a fever, a library, and a secret shared in shame. The $2,000 had bought my body, but it had not bought this life. This life we had built from the ashes of his pride. At the right time, God did know what he was doing when he brought two defective people together. Me, sold like merchandise, him ashamed of his own body, and he showed us that imperfection can create perfection. Our children grew up knowing the truth about our unconventional family. "You're different from other parents," Ella said when she turned 15. "But you're the best parents in the world." "Why the best?" I asked. "Because you chose each other, and you chose us, and chosen love is stronger than obligated love." Our wise Ella. The chosen love truly was stronger. "Arthur," I said in one of our nightly talks on the porch, a tradition we kept all the years of our marriage, "do you think the town ever understood our marriage?" "Some did," he replied. "Others, to this day, think we're strange." "And does that bother you?" "Not anymore. I learned that other people's opinions don't define who we are. We're happy. We have a beautiful family, a prosperous life. What else matters?" It was true. What else mattered? We had built something solid, lasting, based on mutual respect and true love. It wasn't the love from soap operas or romance novels or a teenager's dreams. It was adult love. Mature. Real. "Do you know what I learned from you?" I asked. "That a real man isn't measured by what he has between his legs, but by what he has in his heart. You are more of a man than any other I've ever known." "And you?" he replied. "Taught me that a real woman isn't one who serves her husband out of obligation, but one who chooses to stay out of love. You are the strongest woman I know." Strong. Who would have thought that the frightened little girl, sold by her own father, would become a strong woman? But life teaches us in strange ways. Sometimes, what looks like weakness is actually the beginning of our strength. When we celebrated 20 years of marriage, we had a party. Not a big one like the first day, but an intimate one, with only the people who truly mattered to us. "A toast," Arthur said, raising his glass. "To a marriage that no one bet would work. And it worked more than just well," I completed. "It worked perfectly, in our own way, in our own way." That was the key to everything. We didn't try to be like other couples. We created our own model of happiness. And so, my dear, I learned the greatest lesson of my life. Size doesn't matter, not the size of one's body, nor the size of one's dreams, nor the size of one's prejudices. What matters is the size of the heart, the size of the character, the size of the love. Arthur may not have been the husband a 20-year-old girl would dream of, but he was the partner that the woman I became needed. And I may not have been the ardent wife a 4 or 5-year-old man would desire, but I was the partner his lonely soul needed. Today, at 77, sitting here on the porch of the same farm where I arrived as a frightened bride 57 years ago, I look back and see a life that was worth living. Arthur passed away 10 years ago, in 2013, at the age of 91, sleeping peacefully in our bed, holding my hand. Matilda were his last words. "Thank you for making my life worthwhile." "Thank you," I replied, "for teaching me what true love is." And he smiled, that shy smile I had learned to love, and closed his eyes forever. Our 3 adopted children grew into wonderful adults. Ella Grace became a teacher, married a good man, and gave me 5 grandchildren. "Mama," she always says, "I learned from you that love doesn't have fixed rules. That's why I chose my husband well." Liam became a veterinarian, following in his father's footsteps, caring for animals, and he also brought me 3 beautiful grandchildren. "Dad taught me," he tells his children, "that a man's strength isn't in his body, it's in his character." And Mia, my youngest, became a nurse and dedicates her life to caring for others. "Mama and Daddy showed me," she always says, "that caring is the purest form of loving." She married a kind doctor and brought me 3 more beautiful grandchildren. The 11 grandchildren I have know our whole story. They know that Grandpa Arthur was different, that their grandparents' marriage wasn't like the others, but that it was full of true love. "Grandma," my 5-year-old granddaughter asked me last week, Did you never miss, passion?" "Honey," I replied, "passion burns bright, but fast. What I had with your grandfather was more than passion. It was understanding. It was partnership. It was a love that grows every day." "But didn't you feel incomplete?" she pressed. "Incomplete? Why? I had a husband who respected me, children who love me, grandchildren who visit me, a prosperous life, a farm I helped build. What greater fulfillment is there than that?" And it's true. When I think about the 20-year-old girl I was sold like cattle by her own father, scared, inexperienced, without a voice or a choice, and compare her to the woman I became, respected in the town, owner of one of the largest farms in the region, from a girl who is property to a woman who is respected. This is the ultimate transformation. Matilda's journey from a frightened bride to a powerful matriarch proves that the life others define for you never has to be the one you end up living. She built a legacy of love and respect from the most broken of foundations, and the final wisdom she's about to share is the very heart of this entire story. Mother of 3 admirable children, grandmother of 11 beloved grandchildren, I can only thank God. Miss Tilly, people in town tell me today, you are an example to all of us. An example of what? That it's possible to be happy even when life doesn't turn out as you planned. As if I'd had a chance to plan anything at 20. But they're right. It is possible to be happy when life takes unexpected turns. The secret is not to keep fighting the river, but to learn to navigate with the current, finding beauty even in the most turbulent waters. "Grandma," another grandchild asks me, "what would you say to a girl who was going through the same situation you went through?" I would tell her, I answer without hesitation, don't give up before you know the end of the story. Sometimes what seems like a tragedy at the beginning turns into a blessing in the end. Blessing. My arranged marriage was a blessing in disguise. If my father hadn't sold me out of need, if Arthur hadn't had his intimate problem, if our family hadn't been starving, maybe I would have married some normal boy my age and lived a normal life. But what is normal? Is normal the husband who beats his wife? Is normal the wife who obeys in silence? Is normal having children you can't support? Is normal living without mutual respect? If that's normal, then I'm grateful to have had an abnormal life. A life where my husband asked my opinion instead of giving orders. A life where I could choose, have a say, grow, learn. A life where love was a choice, not an obligation. Miss Tilly, a young woman from town, came to talk to me last month. I'm in a difficult situation. My parents want to marry me to a man I barely know, just because he has money and our family is in need. And how do you feel about him? I asked. Nothing. I don't even know him well. And how does he treat you? With respect. He seems to be a good person. But what? But I dreamed of a romantic love, you know? With passion, with butterflies in my stomach. Honey, I told her, butterflies in the stomach pass. Respect remains, passion fades, partnership grows. I'm not telling you to accept just any arranged marriage. There are many that are truly prisons. But if he's a good man, if he treats you well, if he gives you space to grow, sometimes it's worth a try. And if it doesn't work, then you fight for your rights, you get help, you get out of there. You are no one's property. But if it does work, you might just build something more solid than any youthful passion. I don't know if she followed my advice, but I know I planted a seed. The seed of possibility, of hope, of the idea that not every unexpected ending is an unhappy one. Mama, Ella said to me last Sunday, when the whole family was gathered for dinner, tell the younger grandkids how your marriage was. And there I went, one more time, to tell our story. Once upon a time, I began. There was a 20-year-old girl who thought her life was over when she found out she was going to marry a stranger. The children's eyes shone, as they always do when I tell our saga. And then, Grandma? Asked the youngest, who is 6. Then, my love, she discovered that sometimes God writes straight with crooked lines, that sometimes what looks like a punishment is a gift, that sometimes love arrives in a way you never expected. And did they live happily ever after? They lived happily, in their own way, which is the only way that matters. In their own way. That is the great lesson I want to leave for anyone listening. There is no set recipe for happiness. There is no right or wrong model of love. There is no standard size for fulfillment. There is respect. There is partnership. There is the courage to accept what is different, to build bridges where others see abysses, to find light where others only see darkness. One of my granddaughters asks me, if you could go back in time, would you change anything? I would, yes, I answer. I would change the unnecessary suffering I went through because of shame, because of fear of others' judgment. I would start earlier to accept that our happiness was different, but it was real. Just that? Just that. Because the rest of it, the arranged marriage, the husband with the intimate problem, the adoption of the children, the life on the farm, all of it brought me here. And here is a good place to be. Today, at 77 years old, a widow for 10 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who love me, on a prosperous farm I helped build, in a town that respects me, with memories of a marriage that lasted 46 years of true partnership. Thank you, Arthur. I whisper every night before sleeping, for teaching me that size doesn't matter, that what's important isn't what you have, but what you are, that true love doesn't need fireworks. It just needs to be sincere, constant, and chosen, every single day. When I was 20, I had no choices. My father chose, Arthur chose. But in that bedroom on our wedding night, when he handed me his raw, unvarnished truth for the first time in my life, I truly got to choose. I chose to stay. Arthur chose honesty. And we chose to build a family from 2 lives the world considered imperfect. Now, at 77, as I watch my grandchildren run around this very farm, I realize the greatest lesson. People are always searching for the flame of love, but they forget that the thing that keeps a house warm through the long winter isn't the blazing fire, but the steady, simmering warmth of understanding and acceptance. Our marriage began as a financial transaction, but it ended as a testament. A testament that true love isn't about finding a perfect person, but about learning to love their imperfections completely. My story is just one of millions of stories of hope that need to be heard. If my journey from a sold bride to a free woman has touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, because every week we will discover more ways that life, through its most winding and unexpected paths, always finds the light.